The death of Pennywise. In it, Chapter 2, the Losers Club finally returns to face the clown in his underground lair, but the battle is far from easy. The fight in the sewers is brutal. Eddie, the group's hypochondriac who spent his entire life afraid of germs and contamination, is the first to show real courage. When Pennywise leaves Richie in a trance and is about to kill him, Eddie makes a fatal decision.
If you believe it does. If you believe it does. If you believe it does. Beep, beep, motherfucker!
He grabs a spear-like weapon and attacks Pennywise. For the first time in the film, the monster appears vulnerable, but the victory was short-lived. Pennywise reacts with fury, impaling Eddie with one of his spider-like claws and violently throwing him to the ground. Eddie's sacrifice, however, was not in vain. Consumed by rage and grief, the losers finally understand the secret. Pennywise only has power because they believe he's stronger. United, they begin to taunt the clown, calling him weak, small, pathetic. Every word weakens the creature. The monstrous spider begins to shrink, contort, and lose its terrifying form. From a colossal, all-powerful being, Pennywise is reduced to something pathetic and helpless, exposing his beating heart. With the organ exposed, desperately pulsing, the group comes together one last time. They rip out the heart and crush it together. Pennywise screams. His body crumbles to dust and the entire lair begins to collapse. After decades of terror, the dancing clown finally stopped dancing. The death of Jigsaw. For 3 movies, John Kramer, the Jigsaw killer, was the master of the games, and it's in the 3rd movie that we reach the end of the line. But not without one last brutal game. Jeff Denlin lost his son Dylan, killed by a drunk driver. Consumed by rage and thirst for revenge, Jeff let hatred destroy his family from within, neglecting his daughter Corbett and ruining his marriage with Dr. Lynn Denlin. And that's exactly why Jigsaw chose them for his final test. While Jeff deals with sadistic traps, his wife Lynn is in another part of the building, forced to keep Jigsaw alive with an explosive collar around her neck connected to his heartbeat. If John's heart stops, Lynn dies too. But there's a problem. Amanda Young, Jigsaw's unstable apprentice, isn't following the rules. Consumed by jealousy and emotionally destroyed, she begins creating unwinnable traps, betraying her mentor's philosophy. After Jeff goes through 3 devastating tests where he fails to save his victims, he finally reaches the makeshift operating room and sees his wife, Lynn. But then Amanda shoots her in the back. Jeff doesn't hesitate and kills Amanda with a single shot. This moment that John reveals the truth. The test was never for Lynn, it was for Amanda, and she failed miserably. John, still calm even at death's door, offers to call an ambulance for Lynn in exchange for one final test. Jeff can kill him with the tools nearby and have his revenge, or forgive him, proving he learned his lesson. So Jeff approaches John, places his hand on his chest, and says,
I forgive you.
Yeah, it looks like he didn't forgive anyone. Just seconds later, Jeff activates a power saw and, despite Lynn desperately begging him to stop, he slashes John's throat. With the last of his strength, John grabs a tape recorder and plays one final message. Jeff failed the final test. And the reason he couldn't kill John? Simple. John was the only person who knew where Corbett, Jeff's daughter, was trapped with limited air. To save her, Jeff would have to play another game. When the recording ends, John's heart finally stops. Instantly, Lynn's collar explodes. The master of the games dies, but wins even in death. Jeff lost everything. His wife is dead, his daughter is trapped without air, and he's sealed inside the building. All deaths of Jason Vorhees, the first death. In the very first movie, Jason isn't the masked killer we know today. The figure behind all the murders is Pamela Voorhees, Jason's mother, who, driven by unmatched rage, decides to kill in revenge for her son's supposed drowning back in 1957, blaming the camp counselors for negligence. When she hears that Camp Crystal Lake is going to reopen, she's determined to stop it for good by hunting down and killing the counselors one by one. As the night goes on, bodies start to show up, and the silence of the camp is broken only by screams. The big climax of the film takes place at the edge of Crystal Lake. Alice Hardy, the last survivor, is exhausted, her clothes and face covered in dirt, sitting by the water. That's when Pamela, just who's been chasing her, comes up from behind, ready to strike with a machete. The two wrestle on the ground for several minutes until Alice gains the upper hand and spots the machete on the ground. Pamela realizes what's about to happen, her eyes wide open, and then That's right, her head comes clean off with a single swing. It seems like the nightmare is finally over, so Alice takes refuge in a canoe, letting herself drift across the calm waters of the lake until... In one of the most iconic jump scares in movie history, a young, deformed Jason bursts out of the water and grabs her by the shoulders, pulling her under. It's a completely unexpected moment. Then we cut to Alice waking up in the hospital. Was it just a nightmare? The question lingers in the air, and the Jason legend is born. The first showdown. Months after the massacre, Alice tries to live a quiet, isolated life, but Jason, now grown and very much alive, finds her and kills her, making it clear that the bloodshed isn't over. He begins protecting the area around Crystal Lake, hunting down any intruder. A group of new camp counselors, unaware of the danger, sets up nearby. Among them is Ginny Field, who slowly realizes someone is watching them. One by one, the young counselors disappear, until Ginny finds herself alone running through the forest until she reaches a remote shack. Inside, she finds a disturbing altar with Pamela Voorhees' severed head. Relying on pure survival instinct, Ginny puts on Pamela's sweater and imitates her voice, playing on Jason's emotional weakness. The trick works for a few seconds, but Jason catches on and attacks Ginny. She's saved at the last moment by Paul, and in a burst of courage, she strikes back. Jason stumbles back, bleeding, until he collapses on a pile of junk. Ginny and Paul believe the danger is over and head back to the cabin, exhausted. When they hear noises at the door, they prepare to fight, but it's only their dog. The relief lasts just seconds. Jason, now unmasked, smashes through the window and grabs Ginny. When the ambulance arrives, Ginny is found in shock, calling out for Paul, who's nowhere to be found. Jason's body is missing, meaning the threat isn't gone. The first axe blow. This is the movie where Jason gets his hockey mask. Wounded, Jason hides out in a remote cabin and starts hunting down a new group of teens spending the weekend there. This is where we meet Shelley Finkelstein, one of the franchise's most memorable characters for a strange reason. He owns the hockey mask Jason would end up wearing. Shelley originally brought the mask to prank his friends, but when Jason kills him, he takes the mask for himself, creating the look that would become inseparable from his identity. It's also where Jason takes one of the most iconic hits in the series. Chris Higgins, the protagonist, carries a childhood trauma, an encounter with a strange man in the woods who tried to attack her. As the night goes on, her friends are hunted and killed. The final showdown happens in the barn. Cornered inside, Chris watches Jason advancing, chasing her everywhere. In a desperate move, she jumps right onto Jason and tries to escape. But Jason anticipated it and had the barn locked tight. Chris flees to the upper level and hides, holding a shovel. When Jason climbs up, she catches him off guard with a solid blow to the head, sending him crashing to the floor. She then tries to hang him from a rope and run away. But Jason has other plans and survives to finish what he started. Just as he's about to strike, Ali rushes in with a wooden plank, trying to save Chris. Jason reacts brutally, chopping off Ali's hand and killing him with another violent blow. The distraction gives Chris her chance to act. Jason staggers forward but soon collapses, seemingly dead. Exhausted, Chris escapes across the lake in a canoe. When she least expects it, the decaying corpse of Pamela Voorhees bursts from the water, trying to drag her under. When rescued, Chris is in shock, terrified. The movie ends with Jason's body lying on the ground. The most brutal death. Jason is presumed dead and taken to the morgue, but he wakes up, kills the staff, and returns to Crystal Lake. He starts hunting a group of teens staying in a vacation house next to the home of Tommy Jarvis, a creative kid obsessed with special effects who lives with his mother and sister. Jason spends the entire film on his blood rampage, but Tommy notices something. Jason seems to react strangely to reminders of his childhood. When Jason corners Tommy's sister downstairs, Tommy puts his plan into action. He shaves his head to look as much like young Jason as possible, and it works. The killer becomes fixated on the boy. It's enough time for Tommy's sister to recover and attack Jason, knocking his mask off. While Jason goes after her, Tommy finds the courage to fight back. Jason falls to his knees, but Tommy, overcome with fear and rage, keeps hacking at him over and over. In the end, Tommy is shown at the hospital hugging his sister, but his blank stare hints that the violence has left a permanent mark on him. The copycat. After the brutality of the last film, Jason remains dead. Tommy Jarvis, having survived it all, is trying to move on, but he's still deeply traumatized. Now in a psychiatric hospital, Tommy suffers nightmares and hallucinations of Jason. After escaping the hospital, he moves into a halfway house near the lake, hoping to rebuild his life. Meanwhile, a series of violent murders shakes the area, terrifying the locals. A masked killer starts stalking and killing young people, and suspicion falls on Jason Vorhees, even though he hasn't actually been seen. Eventually, it's revealed that the real killer is Roy Burns, a paramedic seeking revenge for the death of his son, who was murdered at the same psychiatric hospital where Tommy was staying. Roy assumes the identity of the Crystal Lake Killer, brutally murdering several people to punish those he blames. The final fight between Tommy and Roy takes place in a barn near the halfway house. After chasing Pam Roberts and Reggie Winter inside and taking a chainsaw hit to the shoulder, Roy notices Tommy right behind him. Unfortunately, Tommy freezes, thinking he's facing Jason. Roy takes advantage, slashing Tommy's chest with a machete. But Tommy fights back, stabbing Roy in the leg. He uses the chance to climb up to the loft where the others are hiding. Roy finds Reggie hiding behind a hay bale, but Pam jumps in to protect him. In the chaos, Reggie shoves the killer through a window. They get a few seconds of peace before Roy shows up again. He manages to grab the edge and, in a last attempt, grabs Reggie's leg to drag him down with him. But Tommy appears and, with Roy's own machete, does this. Without his hand, Roy loses his grip and falls straight onto the sharp blades of a harrow, getting impaled multiple times. The lightning strike. Obsessed with destroying Jason's body for good, Tommy Jarvis digs up his grave on a stormy night. Inside is Jason's rotting, decomposed corpse, and in a fit of rage, Tommy drives a metal rod into him. But lightning strikes the body, and what was once dead is now alive again, and angrier than ever. Alan, Tommy's friend, tries to help, but Jason punches straight through his chest, rips out his heart, and tosses his body back into the grave. Tommy runs, while Jason takes his hockey mask and begins his return to Crystal Lake. Later, at a camp full of kids, Jason starts the massacre, but Tommy and Megan Garris, the sheriff's daughter, arrive for the final showdown. On the lake, Tommy sets a trap to chain Jason to the bottom, the very place he drowned as a child. He pours gasoline around the boat and sets it on fire, waiting for Jason to surface so he can trap him with a chain tied to a huge boulder. During the struggle, the boat breaks apart, and Tommy is dragged underwater with Jason, nearly drowning. Megan jumps into the lake to save him, but Jason, still alive underwater, grabs her. She fires up the boat's propeller, tearing into Jason, who ends up chained to the lake bed, trapped forever, or so it seems. In the end, Megan revives Tommy. The Awakening. In this movie, we learn about a family tragedy that shaped the fate of Tina Shepard. As a child, she witnesses horrific scenes. Her alcoholic father, John, attacking her mother, Amanda. In desperation, Tina runs to Crystal Lake in a small boat. Her emotions explode and something impossible happens. The pier collapses as if made of paper, and John plunges into the icy waters, disappearing forever. Years later, Tina returns to the family home on Crystal Lake with her mother Amanda and Dr. Cruz, a psychiatrist, who promises to help her overcome the trauma. One night, in deep emotional turmoil, Tina goes alone to the lakeshore. Consumed by guilt, she tries to use her gifts to bring her father back, but something goes terribly wrong. Instead of bringing her father back, she brings Jason. The masked killer emerges from the depths, deadlier than ever. While a group of teens celebrates a birthday at the neighboring house, Jason begins his new killing spree. Overcome with rage and despair, Tina unleashes her full telekinetic power against Jason. The hockey mask shatters, revealing the rotting face beneath. After an intense battle, they end up in the basement, where she sets the killer on fire and blows up the entire house. But Jason rises from the flames. When Nick is knocked unconscious, Tina is left alone against the impossible. In one final act of love and redemption, Tina calls upon something she thought was lost forever, her father's spirit. John Shepard rises from the dark depths of Crystal Lake, not the violent man from the past, but a protective guardian. In slow motion, the chain wraps around Jason as father and daughter reconcile through death. The killer is dragged back into the watery abyss. Toxic bath. Two teens, Jim Miller and his girlfriend Susie Donaldson, are sailing peacefully on Crystal Lake. As they pass by the abandoned camp, Jim tells the legend of Jason Vorhees. Meanwhile, the boat's anchor snags a submerged power cable and drags it right to Jason's dormant body. The electric shock brings the killer back to life. Soon after, Jim plays a prank on Susie with a fake hockey mask, but doesn't live to laugh about it. Jason runs him through with a harpoon. Meanwhile, Susie hides in the boat's hold, but Jason finds her and kills her with the same harpoon. He follows his targets to New York, where in the city's sewers, the last survivors face the killer in one final desperate battle. Jason chases Rennie and Sean into the subway, and then chaos begins. He's electrocuted on the tracks but survives, and when he emerges from the subway, he realizes he's in Times Square. The chase ends in the sewers, where Rennie, determined, throws a barrel of acid in his face. Jason rips off his mask, revealing a melted face and screaming in pain. Rennie and Sean try to escape both Jason and the flooding sewers, but when the tunnels flood, Jason is swept away by the toxic rush. Exhausted, Rennie sees him briefly as the boy from the lake, and then nothing more. The Mystic Dagger. After the events of Jason Takes Manhattan, a young woman arrives at Camp Crystal Lake and steps into one of the cabins for a quick shower. Suddenly, the lights go out. As she checks the problem, she's attacked by Jason Vorhees, somehow resurrected once again. The monster chases her through the woods until bright lights explode all around. Special Forces FBI agents burst from the trees and open fire without stopping. A hail of bullets and finally an airstrike blow Jason to pieces. The young woman is Agent Elizabeth Marcus, sent to lure Jason in after his Manhattan massacre. As the team celebrates, a mysterious man watches from a distance, suspicious. No one notices. Jason's heart is still beating. The shattered remains end up in a morgue in Ohio. Coroner Phil, hypnotized by the demonic organ, devours it and becomes Jason's new host. Phil Jason kills the assistant, then 2 FBI agents. Jason now jumps from body to body through their mouths, a grotesque transfer that turns innocent people into hosts of evil. Each new victim temporarily becomes Jason Voorhees himself, continuing his endless slaughter. But there's one rule: Jason can only be permanently resurrected in the body of a Voorhees family member, and he has a niece. Jessica Kimball, daughter of Diana Kimball and Jason's niece, becomes the final target. Being a Voorhees, only Jessica has the power to destroy Jason forever. In the decisive showdown, she holds an ancient mystic dagger, the only weapon that can end the evil. With a precise strike, the blade pierces his chest. He weakens, easily knocked down until his niece kicks the dagger deep into his chest. The effect is immediate. Demonic hands burst from the ground, grabbing Jason and pulling him into a pit that opens straight to the depths of hell. Jason is swallowed by eternal darkness. But at the last second, a glove with blades on the fingers bursts from the ground, snatching the hockey mask. A spoiler of what's to come. Duel of the Icons. In Freddy vs. Jason, Freddy Krueger is powerless in hell. The people of Springwood have buried his memory so deep he's lost the ability to haunt dreams. But Krueger has a sinister plan. Disguising himself as Pamela Voorhees, Freddy manipulates Jason in hell, convincing him to go to Springwood to kill teenagers. His logic: when Jason starts kids, the panic will make everyone say Freddy's name again, restoring his power. Jason emerges from hell and starts killing. But Freddy makes a fatal mistake. Jason doesn't distinguish between his victims and others. When Jason starts killing teens Freddy had reserved for himself in dreams, the two monsters clash directly. Freddy attacks an unconscious Jason in the dream world, discovering his only weakness: fear of water. He recreates Jason's childhood trauma, the 11-year-old boy being called a freak and pushed into the lake by other kids. But the survivors take Jason back to Crystal Lake so he can fight on his home turf. The epic showdown finally happens. Freddy versus Jason, face to face in the real world. The fight is brutal. At one point, we're almost sure Freddy will win. But the tables turn and Jason fights back. Laurie spreads gasoline on the docks while the fight rages and sets everything ablaze. Exploding propane tanks send both monsters flying into the water. Destroying Crystal Lake in the process. They both survive, and Jason emerges from the water, stabbing Freddy from behind with his own arm. Freddy apparently dies, and Jason sinks into the lake. The next morning, in the mist and absolute silence, something impossible happens. Jason rises from Crystal Lake, holding his machete in one hand, and Freddy's severed head in the other. Uber Jason! In the distant future, Jason Vorhees is finally contained in a very unconventional way. After failed execution attempts, scientist Rowan LaFontaine decides to cryogenically freeze him. But during the process, Jason stabs her, causing a leak that freezes them both together. He remains in a frozen state for 445 years until students in 2455 find him and take him aboard the spaceship Grendel. But Jason never stays down for long. After waking up in the ship's morgue, he begins his killing spree. With the ship damaged and the survivors desperate, the military android KM-14 is upgraded by Suneron with advanced weaponry. In an epic battle, she manages to defeat Jason for a while. Jason's remains end up in a medical station, but the technology is on the wrong side. Nearly an hour later, the nanotech-equipped station repairs and rebuilds his body, turning him into something far worse. Uber Jason. A cybernetic fusion of dead flesh and impenetrable metal, faster, stronger, and deadlier than ever. The result is inevitable: more blood, more victims, more chaos. Uber Jason is so strong he easily defeats KM-14. Waylander sacrifices himself by detonating explosives, but Jason survives. He punctures the shuttle's hull, sucking Janessa into the vacuum of space. In the climax, when an explosion propels Jason toward the last survivors, Sergeant Brodsky intercepts him mid-flight. In one final heroic act, he steers them both into the atmosphere of Earth-2. Uber Jason is ejected into space and incinerated as he enters the new planet's atmosphere, but the mask survives, landing gently in a lake. Two teens cheer at the shooting star they saw, unaware the Crystal Lake Terror has now reached their new world. The Return. In the 2009 film, Jason Vorhees returns more agile, brutal, and calculating than ever. The story begins with a group of young people camping near Crystal Lake, but the night turns into a nightmare when Jason emerges from the shadows, killing everyone quickly and mercilessly, except Whitney Miller, whom he decides to keep alive. The reason? Jason mistakes Whitney for his mother, Pamela Voorhees, because of their physical resemblance. He takes her to a hidden captivity, an underground tunnel system he uses to move around the camp and ambush his victims. 6 weeks later, Whitney's brother, Clay Miller, arrives at Crystal Lake, searching for his missing sister. The final showdown takes place on the dock by the lake. Clay and Jenna, a survivor from the second group, try to rescue Whitney, but Jason corners them. Using his mother's locket as a distraction, Whitney tricks him. The moment gives Clay a chance to attack, chaining Jason to the dock with heavy chains. They manage to strangle him and stab him repeatedly until Jason seems finally dead. The body is dragged and thrown into the lake, but at the last moment, he bursts from the water and pulls Whitney under, showing the terror is far from over. All deaths of Chucky, the first death. It all started in 1988. After using voodoo magic to transfer his soul into the body of a good guy doll, the serial killer Charles Lee Ray, now Chucky, begins his hunt against little Andy Barkley, only 6 years old. But there was a weakness. Trapped inside the doll for too long, Chucky was starting to turn human on the inside. His organs were beginning to form, and that meant a shot to the heart could actually kill him. At the movie's climax, the chase inside the apartment reaches its breaking point. Chucky is trapped in the fireplace, and the flames consume his plastic body. Charred, missing an arm and a leg, he rises from the ashes even more terrifying, staggering, and laughing. Karen Barkley and Detective Mike Norris fight to hold the creature back. Karen fires several times at Chucky, blowing apart pieces of the doll, his head, his limbs, until he's reduced to scattered parts all over the room. Even so, Chucky manages to crawl through the house ventilation using only one arm, determined to finish his curse. That's when the final shot happens. Norris hits the doll's heart directly, the one spot that could really kill him. Chucky's body jerks back, motionless, and silence fills the scene. The first death in the franchise is unforgettable, and it ends with a macabre irony. The doll's weak voice still spits out his classic catchphrase.
I'm Chucky. Wanna play?
It seemed like the end of Charles Lee Ray's curse, but as you already know, this was only the beginning. The explosion. 2 years after the events of the first movie, Andy Barkley now lives in a foster home, since his mother was sent to a psychiatric institution. Meanwhile, the Play Pals company, the one behind the Good Guys dolls, decides to rebuild Chucky in an attempt to clear their bad reputation and prove their toys are harmless. But the marketing stunt goes wrong. Very wrong. As soon as he's reborn in a new body, Chucky starts another hunt, killing anyone who gets in his way of reaching Andy. After murdering the boy's foster parents, the doll forces Kyle, Andy's foster sister, to take him to the boy. The final showdown happens inside the Play Pals factory itself. Among conveyor belts and giant machines, the setting turns into a nightmare. Chucky is no longer the friendly doll from the store shelf. Even needing a cart to move around, he fearlessly charges at the boy, but misses the strike and gets stuck in the machine gears. That's when Andy manages to open a valve right above the monster. A stream of molten plastic pours onto Chucky, covering his entire body. The hot material hardens, sticking to and deforming his face, turning him into an even more grotesque version of himself. But even that doesn't stop him. Twisted and hardened, he still keeps trying to finish his goal. In desperation, his sister comes up with a fatal idea. He grabs a compressed air hose and shoves it straight into the doll's mouth. The pressure starts to grotesquely inflate Chucky's head, swelling like a balloon about to burst, until it explodes in a rain of plastic, blood, and guts splattering all over the factory. It was one of the craziest deaths so far, and it seemed like the definitive end. But, as always, not with Chucky, the fan. Although released just a year after the second movie, the story of Child's Play 3 takes place many years later. Andy is now a 16-year-old teenager attending military school, but even in this strict environment, Chucky's shadow comes back to haunt him. During his new hunt, the doll meets Tyler, a younger and more naive cadet.
What's your name, kid?
Tyler, what's yours?
Chucky. But, my real name is Charles Lee Ray.
Chucky sees in him the perfect chance to finally get an easier human body to possess and tries to transfer his soul into the boy. But Andy isn't about to let that happen. He storms into the Devil's Lair ride, where Chucky is trying to perform the ritual, and the two clash among the attraction's mechanical props. In the middle of the fight, a huge mechanical scythe does this. The blade slices across Chucky's face, tearing half of it open. Now he's not only terrifying because of his murderous nature, but also for his grotesque appearance, with plastic and blood mixed into a nightmarish portrait. Even mutilated, he keeps trying to finish the ritual to take Tyler's body. This doll doesn't give up. The boy manages to shoot Chucky and he loses his arm. Another shot hits his chest and the doll falls backward. For a brief moment, it seems like the fight is over, but suddenly, Chucky jumps onto Andy's back again. Exhausted, Andy sees his only chance to end the nightmare once and for all. He takes a pocket knife from Tyler and with all his strength cuts off the doll's hand, sending him tumbling into a giant fan. The spinning blades suck the killer doll inside. The fan shreds Chucky into pieces, scattering doll fragments through the air. It was the end, or at least it seemed to be, the grave. Years later, in Bride of Chucky, the franchise shifts tone, mixing horror with dark humor and sarcasm. Tiffany, his old lover, manages to recover what's left of that shredded body. Stitching each part back together with her own hands and performing a voodoo ritual, she brings Charles Lee Ray's soul back once more. From the wreckage rises a new version of Chucky, now more threatening, covered in scars, and with an even crueler smile. The reunion quickly turns into a lover's quarrel.
You mean you weren't gonna ask me to marry you?
What are you, nuts?
When Chucky refuses to marry her, Tiffany locks him inside a toy playpen. In revenge, Chucky breaks free, pushes Tiffany into a bathtub, and throws a plugged-in TV into the water, electrocuting her to death. The macabre irony is that Tiffany, now trapped in a doll's body, becomes Chucky's bride, and so the killer doll couple is formed, acting like a horror version of Bonnie and Clyde. They kidnap young couple Jesse and Jade and go on a road trip with one goal: to find Charles Lee Ray's human body and the heart of Damballa, the amulet that can turn them human again. At the climax in a cemetery, Tiffany, now in a new doll's body, realizes Chucky doesn't truly love her. In an act of defiance, she stabs him in the chest, but she dies shortly after. Jesse then smashes Chucky with a shovel and throws him into the open grave, where Charles Lee Ray's human body is buried. Inside the pit, furious and mocking, Chucky looks up and spits out his final words before the end.
Go ahead and shoot! I'll be back. I always come back!
Jade doesn't hesitate. She points the gun into the grave and fires multiple shots. The bullets rip through the doll's tiny body and he finally falls lifeless at the bottom of the grave. The revenge. In 2004's Seed of Chucky, the saga takes an unexpected turn. Glenn, the son of Chucky and Tiffany, lives as a ventriloquist doll in England. Traumatized and confused about his origins, he runs away after seeing on TV that his parents' dolls are being used in a Hollywood movie. Using the Heart of Damballa amulet, Glenn manages to bring Chucky and Tiffany back to life.
Wake up. Ade Duel Damballa. Awake.
At first, there's an attempt at change. Tiffany believes they can stop killing, but Chucky, true to his murderous nature, quickly goes back to slaughtering. At the climax, inside the hospital, the tension explodes. Chucky kills Tiffany in a fit of rage, and before Glenn's eyes, the family bond is completely destroyed.
Okay, son. Oh, boy. Be a good girl. Or boy. Whatever.
Horrified but consumed by anger, Glenn turns against his own father. One strike rips off Chucky's arms, another cuts off his legs. Even in pieces, the doll keeps laughing maniacally, mocking his son. But Glenn doesn't hesitate. He delivers the final blow, Chucky once and for all. The head rolls across the floor, motionless. It was the end, at least for that body. The flashback. After 9 years away, Chucky returns in Curse of Chucky, bringing the franchise back to its gothic horror roots. The movie begins with a mysterious package arriving at the home of Nika, a young woman in a wheelchair living with her mother, Sarah. Soon after, Sarah dies under strange circumstances, and Nika's family, including her sister Barb and brother-in-law Ian, arrive for the funeral. As the night goes on, family members are brutally murdered one by one. First, he starts with Jill, the babysitter. Then he kills Barb, who goes up to the bedroom where he is, still thinking he's just a harmless doll, but she gets too close. Later, he continues his killing spree with Ian, who suspected that everything happening was Nika's fault, but he realizes too late that it wasn't. Near the end of the movie, Chucky reveals a flashback of his past to Nika, explaining his connection to the family and why he's doing all of this. We find out that Charles Lee Ray, still human, had kidnapped Sarah years earlier and developed a sick obsession with her. It was during this time that he ended up being hunted by the police, wounded, and cornered inside the toy store. There, with his last breath, he recited a voodoo spell, and only after lightning struck the store did his soul enter the body of a good guy doll. That's how Chucky was born. The final showdown happens inside the house, already consumed by chaos. Nika alone faces the killer doll head-on. She grabbed a knife and struck Chucky in the back. The doll stopped moving and it seemed like the end. But as always, he doesn't really die. Right after, Chucky appears sitting in a chair, a cruel reminder that the curse would continue.
So, who's next?
The original head. Years later, Nika's story continues inside a psychiatric hospital. It's in this setting that Chucky's voodoo reaches the peak of its power. Now he's able to split his soul into multiple dolls, spreading chaos among patients and doctors. Meanwhile, Andy Barkley, the same kid from the very first movie, now an adult scarred by a lifetime of being hunted, keeps his own twisted trophy, the original Chucky's head, locked away in a safe. It's alive, conscious, and Andy torments it without mercy in a macabre game that reveals both his thirst for revenge and the obsession that still consumes him. While that doll was being tortured by Andy inside the hospital, one of the Chuckies finds an even darker escape. He manages to transfer his soul into Nika's body. Free from the wheelchair with a new human body and a sadistic smile, Chucky heads off to meet Tiffany. Together, they vanish into the night, starting a new chapter in the curse, The Return. A few years after the events of Cult of Chucky, we find out that Charles Lee Ray's curse wasn't buried in the movies. Now it's reborn in a new format, a TV series. That's where we meet Jake Wheeler, a lonely teenager who finds a good guy doll at a yard sale. What seemed like just an old toy quickly becomes the start of another massacre. After weeks of tormenting Jake Wheeler and his friends, Chucky finally meets what looks like his end. Fueled by rage and the weight of everything he's lost, Jake grabs Chucky by the neck. The doll fights back, laughing and twisting, but Jake doesn't let go. Through tears and screams of fury, he squeezes until he crushes the doll's body. For Jake, it's a moment of revenge and release. But as we know with Chucky, death is never really the end. The cargo accident. Right at the start of season 2, Chucky shows he doesn't come alone. A truck loaded with dozens of good guy dolls, each carrying a fragment of his soul, hits the road. The plan was grand, to infiltrate a children's event and spread his essence as if they were evil clones. But fate has an explosive ending. Inside, dozens of Chuckies are consumed by the flames. Plastic and stuffing fly through the air, glowing in the blast. The poisoning. In season 2 of Chucky, we got one of the craziest moments in the whole franchise. As we already saw in Cult of Chucky, the doll discovers a new trick. He learns a voodoo ritual that lets him split his soul into multiple bodies at once. That means there's no longer just one Chucky, but many dolls possessed, each carrying a part of Charles Lee Ray's soul and personality. And here we have two of them. Buff Chucky, trained and conditioned to be physically stronger, and the Colonel, a Chucky who takes on a leadership role like a general. Buff Chucky was different. He looked unstoppable with his muscles and brute strength, the kind of enemy no one would dare face. But the Colonel wasn't just anyone. While Buff Chucky relied only on strength, the Colonel used strategy. He knew muscles mean nothing against someone who knows when to strike. And that's exactly what happened. The Colonel poisoned Buff Chucky, cold and calculated. The franchise's giant had no chance. His body slowly paralyzed until he collapsed, lifeless on the ground. In the end, no matter how powerful you are, there's always someone smarter, ready to take you down. The gunshot. In episode 7 of season 2, Andy, after years of running and fighting against different versions of Chucky, finally faces one. Without hesitation, Andy shoots the doll. It's the original survivor showing that no matter how many Chuckies appear, he'll always be ready. The chainsaw. One of the most memorable deaths happens when Lexi jumps on Chucky, grabs his chainsaw, and uses it against him mercilessly. The deafening roar of the blade fills the air, building almost unbearable tension. In a burst of fury, she charges straight at Chucky. The doll screams, curses, and tries to fight back, but the chainsaw rips through his plastic body. This time, it's not just a slash. Lexi shreds him into multiple pieces, scattering stuffing and plastic all over the floor of the abandoned house. The bomb. Chucky has always been over the top, but in Season 3 he reaches an apocalyptic level. After infiltrating the White House and manipulating everyone around him, the killer doll manages something unthinkable: access to the nuclear codes. Inside the control room, the place is pure chaos. Alarms blare, red lights flash, and in the middle of it all stands Chucky with that evil grin on his plastic face. The monitors show a nuclear being launched toward the North Pole, and that's when Chucky, in one last provocation, yells. At that very moment, the screen bursts into light. The doll's body starts dissolving out of nowhere, as if being consumed by the very energy of the disaster he caused. Little by little, he disintegrates into dust, disappearing right before everyone's eyes. All deaths of Michael Myers. The first death. In 1963, in the quiet town of Haddonfield, Illinois, a shocking crime shatters Halloween night. 6-year-old Michael Myers brutally murders his older sister, Judith. Locked away in a psychiatric hospital, he becomes the patient of Dr. Samuel Loomis. 15 years later, on the eve of Halloween 1978, Michael escapes and returns to his hometown. Now an adult, Michael stalks babysitter Laurie Strode and her friend through a night of terror. The relentless hunt, with fear growing at every shadow and sound, leads to the moment when Dr. Loomis, knowing the danger Michael represents, rushes to save Laurie. Inside the Doyle house, the final and most important showdown happens. Without hesitation, Loomis fires 6 shots at the masked killer. The bullets push Michael backward until he crashes over the second-floor balcony. That seemed like the end, but it wasn't. When Loomis looks again through the window, what he sees is disturbing. The lawn is empty. Michael's body has vanished as if it had never been there. That death was only the beginning, because shortly after, Michael struck again, leading directly into the events of Halloween 2. The fire. What seemed like just another night of terror in Haddonfield hid an even darker truth. Laurie Strode wasn't just the unlucky babysitter who crossed the paths with Michael Myers. She was actually his younger sister. This revelation, made in Halloween 2, explains Michael's relentless pursuit. He wouldn't rest until the last tie to his family was gone. And so, Laurie's nightmare was far from over. Immediately after the fall from the balcony, Michael Myers reappears and follows Laurie to Haddonfield Memorial Hospital. While Dr. Loomis continues his desperate hunt, Michael begins a new massacre inside the hospital, turning the dark hallways into a death trap. Terrified and injured, Laurie desperately tries to escape, but Michael's shadow follows her at every turn. When Dr. Loomis and Laurie finally meet, they're cornered by Michael. In the final showdown, Laurie finds the courage to do the unthinkable. With the kind of precision that only happens in movies, she shoots Michael in both eyes. Blood runs down his mask and the killer is left momentarily blind. But even then, he keeps moving forward, guided only by his instinct to kill. That's when Dr. Loomis makes his most extreme choice. Inside the operating room, he releases the gas and, with a look of sacrifice, causes a massive explosion. Michael staggers through the hallway engulfed in flames, a vision straight out of hell. Each step is heavier, each movement slower, until finally he collapses to the ground, motionless, and the fire finishes the job. It looked like the end, but evil doesn't burn away so easily. 10 years later, in Halloween 4, we find out he survived the fire, though left in a deep coma, and once again, the terror begins. The night without Michael. You might be wondering, what about the third movie? Well, after the final showdown in Halloween 2, the producers had a different plan: to turn the franchise into an annual horror anthology for Halloween, each with its own unique story. And Halloween 3, Season of the Witch, was the result. After 2 bloody nights in Haddonfield, the series took a completely unexpected turn. Instead of Michael Myers, the terror this time came from somewhere else: a sinister corporation called Silver Shamrock that made masks for kids. The plan? To trigger a deadly ritual on Halloween night, turning fun into a nightmare.
2 more days to Halloween, Halloween, Halloween. 2 more days to Halloween, Silver Shamrock.
But this was just a standalone story with nothing to do with the events in Haddonfield, so we won't dig too deep into it. It wasn't until the next film that the masked killer returned to reclaim his throne of terror. The Return. After the financial disaster and cold reception of Halloween 3, the franchise needed to go back to its roots. Ignoring the previous film's plot, the producers decided to bring back the most iconic figure in horror, Michael Myers. In Halloween 4, we learn that Michael survived the 1981 fire, though he remained in a coma. When he's being transferred, he wakes up after hearing about his niece, Jamie Lloyd, the only living relative, and heads back to Haddonfield to continue his killing spree. The whole town becomes a battlefield, with armed locals trying to stop the evil that's returned to haunt them. Out of nowhere, Michael climbs onto the truck carrying his niece and wipes out all the men assigned to protect her. That leaves only Rachel Carruthers, Jamie's foster sister, and the one looking after her that night. With that in mind, Rachel makes a bold move. She takes control of the truck. Suddenly, she slams the brakes, sending Michael flying. When he gets up, he's hit full force. Everything seems calm. Jamie even approaches her uncle to say goodbye, but the man without a shred of humanity doesn't hesitate. He tries to kill her. Before he can, the police and townspeople take matters into their own hands. It looked like the end, but at the start of Halloween 5, we learn he escaped. Seriously? How is that even possible? The ambush. On the brink of death, Michael is found by a lone hermit, who nurses him back to health for a whole year after he crawls from the pit into a nearby stream. Then, the next Halloween, Michael wakes from his coma, kills his unlikely savior, and begins the hunt again. He returns to torment his niece, Jamie Lloyd, who's now mute and deeply traumatized. And remember Dr. Loomis's sacrifice in the second film? Well, at the end of Halloween 4, we see he also survived the explosion, though his face is scarred and his hand badly burned. So now in the fifth film, Loomis is no longer just the psychiatrist trying to contain evil. Obsessed with stopping Michael once and for all, he discovers Jamie has a psychic connection to her uncle. And decides to use her as bait for a trap. The hunt intensifies, leading to a final confrontation in the old Myers family house, where Michael once killed his sister Judith. After another bloody night, Dr. Loomis is willing to do anything to end the evil haunting Haddonfield. This time, he decides to flip the game. Using Jamie as bait, Loomis lures Michael Myers into a trap. Suddenly, a heavy metal net drops on the killer, pinning him down. Loomis doesn't hesitate. Fueled by rage, he attacks Michael with a wooden beam, strike after strike, until the creature finally seems to give in, knocking the masked figure to the ground, motionless. The police arrive and take Michael into custody. Evil finally behind bars, or at least that's what it looked like. At the very end of the film, a mystery appears. An enigmatic man in black storms Haddonfield's police station. In a sudden massacre, he kills every cop and blows up the cells. When the smoke clears, Michael's cell is empty. He's been freed. This bizarre twist sets the stage for the next movie, where the secrets behind that macabre rescue start to unfold. The final showdown. 6 years after the events of Halloween 5, Michael Myers is still on the loose, and his niece Jamie has been held captive by the Cult of Thorn, a dark sect that believes Michael is the embodiment of an ancient curse. The cult forces Jamie to give birth to a baby, part of a twisted ritual to keep the curse alive. The baby's parentage is never made fully clear, but all signs point to Michael Myers himself being involved, making the story even sicker. Dr. Loomis, now older and disillusioned, returns to Haddonfield for one last attempt to end the curse that's haunted him for years. During the film, we discover that Michael is indeed controlled by an ancient curse that drives him to kill. In the middle of this dark storyline, the most unexpected showdown happens. Tommy Doyle, the little boy who survived that first night of terror in 1978, returns and injects the killer with a corrosive substance, making Michael writhe in pain. Without hesitation, he grabs a heavy lead pipe and unleashes his fury on the masked figure, blow after blow, until Michael lies on the ground, motionless. It seemed like the end, evil finally defeated, but the conclusion isn't that simple. When Dr. Loomis goes back to check on the body, all he finds is Michael Myers' mask lying on the floor. Right after, we hear Loomis's scream echo in the dark. The film doesn't show what happened, but it suggests Michael escaped, and it maybe attacked his old pursuer. This is the last time we see Myers in this timeline. The storyline ends here, and the character would only return years later in a new reboot of the franchise. The Axe. Halloween H20 is a direct sequel to Halloween 2, focusing on what happened to Laurie Strode 20 years after that night of terror. Now the headmistress of a private school, Laurie lives under a false name and is still haunted by her trauma. But when Michael Myers finds her again, she decides to stop running and face her brother head-on. In a brutal showdown, Laurie takes the fight to the limit. At the decisive moment, she traps Michael between a van and a tree, pinning him in place. The masked killer, who once seemed invincible, is finally vulnerable.
Michael.
With one final strike, Laurie lifts the axe and decapitates him under the silent night sky. The most definitive, most satisfying, and most symbolic death in the whole franchise. Laurie had finally defeated the evil that haunted her for decades. At least that's what she thought. Because in the next film, we'd get a very controversial twist. The fire. In Halloween Resurrection, we find out Michael Myers wasn't the one who lost his head in the previous movie. Turns out that before the final scene, Myers had attacked a paramedic and crushed his larynx so he couldn't speak, and switched clothes with him. Yeah, credit to the writer for coming up with that one. So, Laurie ended up decapitating an innocent man, while the real Michael escaped to keep killing. In this movie, we also find out Laurie was committed to a psychiatric hospital after killing that paramedic. Not long after, Michael returns to Haddonfield. This time, he finds his old house being used as the set for a reality show that's being live-streamed on the internet. Michael then turns the filming into his new hunting ground. At the film's peak, in the middle of a setting already engulfed in flames, Michael is trapped between exposed electrical wires. A brutal surge of electricity ripped through his body, leaving him more vulnerable than ever. A massive explosion in the middle of the fire finishes the job, consuming him in flames. It looked like the final end, evil reduced to ashes. But as we know, Michael always comes back. In the final scene, his charred body is taken to the morgue. The coroner sets out his tools, ready to start the autopsy. But before the first cut, something chilling happens. Michael's eyes open, and just like that, the H20 timeline ends. No continuation, no explanation, just the certainty that once again, death wasn't enough to stop Michael Myers. When it seemed like the legend was finally over, the myth was reborn under a new and even more brutal vision. The headshot. In 2007, director Rob Zombie rebooted the franchise, retelling Michael Myers' story with a more brutal and psychological approach. The film dives into Michael's troubled childhood and his motives for becoming a killer. The story follows him from his time in the psychiatric hospital to his escape and return to Haddonfield, where he finally meets young Laurie Strode for the final showdown. After a brutal chase, Laurie manages to put an end, or so it seems, to Michael's rage. They end up on the second floor, and in the struggle, both of them crash through a window. Still on the ground, Laurie grabs Dr. Loomis's gun and pulls the trigger several times point blank, but the gun jams. Before the worst happens, a shot is fired. And Michael appears to be dead. His breathing stops, his body goes still, and silence takes over the scene. But as we know, evil never dies so easily. Right at the beginning of Halloween 2, 2009, we discover the shot wasn't enough to finish him off. The end of Rob Zombie. Halloween 2 continues Rob Zombie's reboot, digging deeper into Laurie Strode's psychological trauma after the night of terror, while Dr. Loomis tries to cash in on his fame with a book. The bullet disfigured part of Michael's face, but it didn't stop him from rising again. So he returns even more monstrous, resuming his killings with greater brutality than ever, now driven by visions of his mother and his younger self. The violence is more graphic and extreme, culminating in two different endings that close this timeline for good. The final sequence of this film has two versions, and both mark the conclusion of Rob Zombie's timeline. In the theatrical version, after a bloody hunt, Michael Myers is finally brought down. He falls onto farm equipment and is then gunned down mercilessly by the police. Disoriented after stabbing Michael's already lifeless body, Laurie walks outside. After that, she is committed to a psychiatric hospital. In the director's cut, the ending is even darker.
Michael, for God in hell, die!
Dr. Loomis tries to confront Michael but is killed by the killer's own hands. Moments later, police open fire on Myers, finally taking him down. In a disturbing vision, Laurie picks up the knife and stabs her already defeated brother in one last act of rage and despair. After that, she's taken to a psychiatric institution, suggesting the trauma completely consumed her. No matter which version you watch, the outcome is the same. Michael Myers meets his definitive death in this timeline. Rob Zombie closes out his duology in a grim way, leaving no room for the killer's return. The Trap. Now, ignoring all the previous films except the original 1978 classic, Halloween 2018 resets the story and shows Laurie Strode still deeply traumatized 40 years after Michael Myers' first attack. She's isolated herself, turned her home into a fortress, and spent her entire life preparing for Michael's inevitable return. In the movie, he escapes from a psychiatric hospital and heads back to Haddonfield, giving Laurie the chance to finally put an end to her nightmare. She sets her revenge plan into motion, and along with her daughter Karen and granddaughter Allison, lures Michael into her house, which is really a carefully built trap. When the basement door locks, there's no turning back. The three women set the house on fire, leaving Michael to burn alive in the flames. But at the beginning of Halloween Kills 2021, we find out it didn't quite end that way. The mob's revenge. As the Strode family flees in desperation, a team of firefighters arrives to put out the fire and unknowingly frees Michael from the burning basement. After escaping the blaze, Michael launches into another brutal killing spree in Haddonfield. The town, already in panic, spirals into chaos when the residents band together, determined to hunt and kill Michael themselves. Led by Tommy Doyle, the little boy from the first movie, the mob decides evil can't be contained by the police, only destroyed. The mob unleashes decades of pent-up rage, striking with bats, knives, and bullets.
It's Halloween. Everyone's entitled to one good scare.
The masked killer falls to the ground, apparently defeated. In a final blow, Karen Strode stabs him in the back, believing she's ended the threat once and for all. But evil doesn't die that easily. Seconds later, just as everyone thinks it's over, Michael begins to move. He rises, then slaughters each of his attackers one by one, leaving the ground soaked in blood. Without hurry, Myers returns to his childhood home and finds Karen, who is brutally murdered. The final showdown. After the massacres of the previous film, Halloween Ends takes place 4 years later, with Laurie Strode trying to live in peace while writing her memoirs. Haddonfield, however, still hasn't healed. Michael Myers has vanished, and the movie introduces Corey Cunningham, who suddenly becomes the town's new target of hate. The story builds toward a climax where the final battle isn't just between Michael and Laurie, but the culmination of decades of trauma and violence. After years of pursuit, Laurie Strode and Michael Myers finally face their ultimate confrontation. Laurie manages to pin Michael down on the counter, driving knives through his hands. Without hesitation, she slits his throat, then his wrists, leaving him to bleed out slowly. But Laurie knows, for the evil that haunted her life, that's not enough. The entire town of Haddonfield comes together to witness the end. In a ritual-like procession, Michael's body is carried to a junkyard. There, in front of everyone, he's thrown into an industrial shredder. The machine tears his body apart completely, destroying him until nothing is left. All deaths of Freddy Krueger, the first death. In A Nightmare on Elm Street, we meet Nancy Thompson, a teenager whose life literally turns into a nightmare. She and her friends start dreaming about a grotesque figure, a man with a burned face and a glove with sharp blades. But before becoming that figure, Freddy was a child killer in Springwood. When his crimes were discovered, he was arrested but released because of a technical error in the trial. Outraged, the victim's parents got together and burned him alive. Now Freddy comes back to get revenge through the dreams of their children. What seemed like just a bizarre nightmare soon turns into a cruel reality as Nancy's friends begin to die in their sleep. One of those deaths is Glenn Lance, Nancy's boyfriend, who tries to fight off sleep but can't. Lying on his bed with the TV on and headphones in, he slowly dozes off. That's when Freddy makes his move. Without giving him any chance to fight back, the monster grabs him and drags him into the mattress, as if the bed were a direct portal to the nightmare. Suddenly, we see one of the most gruesome scenes ever. A huge geyser of blood bursts from the bed, spraying gallons and gallons all over the room. When his mom opens the door, all she finds is a room soaked in blood. Glenn is gone. That's when Nancy realizes the truth. Freddy Krueger isn't just a figment of the imagination. At the very climax of their battle, Nancy discovers the secret. Freddy can't exist without fear. He feeds on the terror of his victims and determined to end the cycle. She lures him into the real world, where he loses most of his powers. He may lose control over dreams, but he's still physically dangerous. And then Nancy does the unthinkable. Instead of fighting, she simply turns her back on him.
It's too late, Krueger. I know the secret now. This is just a dream. This whole thing is just a dream. I want my mother and friend again.
What?
I take back every bit of energy I gave you. You're nothing.
By taking away her fear and her energy, Nancy strips Freddy of the only weapon he had left. Weakened, he starts to disintegrate, exploding into a bright light until he completely disappears. That's how Nancy defeated the nightmare, at least for now. The Kiss of Love. In A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's revenge, 5 years have passed since Nancy Thompson faced the terror in dreams. Now, a new family moves into her old house. That's where Jesse Walsh, the teenage son, begins to be tormented by increasingly intense nightmares. But this time, Freddy has an even darker plan. Instead of just killing in dreams, he decides to possess Jesse's body to act in the real world. This second film showed one of the darkest versions of Freddy Krueger. Unlike the sarcastic one-liners that would later define him, here he is almost always wrapped in shadow. Grim, humorless, reinforcing a heavier and even disturbing tone.
You are all my children now.
While Jesse struggles to keep his sanity, the only person who believes him is his girlfriend, Lisa. In the final confrontation, in the middle of chaos, Lisa discovers that the only way to save Jesse isn't with force, but through the bond between them. She faces the monstrous creature, looks into his eyes, and kisses him. That act of love breaks Freddy's control. Freddy screams, twists in agony, and then his body starts burning from the inside out, melting away until only Jesse is left, freed from the nightmare. In the end, Lisa's kiss brought not just Jesse's salvation, but Freddy's temporary destruction too. The Grave. In A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors, Freddy Krueger returns once again, and this time his victims are gathered in a psychiatric hospital. The surviving teens from Elm Street are treated as if they're only suffering from delusions, but Nancy Thompson, now a therapist, knows the truth. Nancy teaches the group how to discover hidden powers within their dreams, turning them into warriors capable of fighting Freddy on equal ground. The movie stands out for balancing a dark atmosphere with almost fantastical dream elements, while also giving Freddy more room for the sarcastic humor that would become his trademark. That's where Dr. Neil Gordon comes in. Guided by the spirit of Amanda Krueger, Freddy's mother, he learns that the secret to ending the nightmare lies in the real world, the killer's remains. Even with the kids united, Krueger proves nearly unstoppable, killing some. For the first time, it looked like he had truly won, but Nancy, in one last act of bravery, uses him apart. A holy light pierces through his body, burning him from the inside out. That way, he's defeated on two fronts, by Nancy's sacrifice in the dream world and by the purification of his remains in the real world. For the first time, it seemed like the nightmare had finally been laid to rest. The Mirror of Souls. In A Nightmare on Elm Street 4, the Dream Master, Freddy manages what many thought was impossible. He comes back from the dead and takes out the surviving Dream Warriors one by one. Kristen, the last of the original warriors, is hunted relentlessly. Before being killed, though, she passes on her ability to pull others into dreams to her friend Alice. That gives Alice a heavy burden, but also a powerful weapon. As Freddy continues his slaughter, Alice absorbs the powers of Joey, who could control water in his dreams. When Freddy kills him, Joey's soul and his power over water transfer to Alice. She also absorbs Kincaid's super strength. Before Freddy kills him, Kincaid shouts at Alice to keep going, and his power flows to her too. Each death strengthens not only the killer, but also her. That's how the Dream Master is born, the only one strong enough to face him head on. In the final showdown, Alice realizes Freddy's true source of strength. He feeds on the souls trapped inside him. The battle takes place in a church, a place of purification and redemption, a perfect contrast to Freddy's evil plan. Remembering a nursery rhyme about the Dream Master, Alice recites the verses to weaken him until she manages to bring him before a giant mirror. Then she forces him to look at himself.
Them out!
That's the moment the trapped souls finally find their chance. One by one, they begin to fight back, pushing, tearing, and ripping Freddy apart from the inside. Screaming in desperation, Freddy tries to resist, but there's no way to stop the rage of the innocent lives he devoured. His body is shredded until only a pile of empty clothes remains, where once stood the sadistic killer. Once again, it seemed Freddy had met his end, but well, the story goes on. The Nightmare Baby. In A Nightmare on Elm Street 5, the dream child, Freddy finds a new way to terrorize his victims, and this time the plan is even darker. He starts using the dreams of Alice's unborn child as a gateway to continue his killing spree. Yeah, this guy really never gives up, huh? Determined to protect her baby, Alice looks for a way to end the dream killer once and for all. That's when she finds an unexpected ally, the spirit of Amanda Kruger, Freddy's mother. Amanda knows her son is an abomination, but still she decides to intervene to stop Freddy from spreading more terror. In the final showdown, inside an abandoned asylum in the dream world, Amanda faces her own demonic son. Encouraged by Amanda, Alice goes up against Freddy once again, but this time, something different happens. The unborn baby, used by Freddy as a bridge to the real world, turns against him.
Unleash the power he has given you.
School's out, Cougar.
At the same time, the three souls Freddy devoured throughout the film start rebelling, tearing his body apart from the inside. With unstoppable spiritual force, he's weakened until he's reduced to his most primitive form, a deformed, helpless baby, symbol of his cursed origin. He's no longer a monster, he's just an abomination. At that moment, his mother's spirit consumes him, not like a hug, but as if purifying his soul from evil, and they both vanish. For a moment, it looked like the cycle had finally ended. Freddy, reduced to his infant form, was silenced by his own mother. At the end of the movie, Alice gives birth to her son, Jacob, perfectly healthy. Evil was wiped out, and life could go on. The final explosion. In Freddy's Dead, the final nightmare, the dream killer reaches the height of his reign of terror. Freddy was chosen by dream demons to become a legend and hunt down the souls of Elm Street's children. But those demons can only give him power if there are kids in town, and since they're running out, his power is fading. That's when an unexpected revelation comes. Freddy has a daughter, Maggie. His plan is to use Maggie to have children who would then be used to spread terror and feed his power. He sees her as the key to a new generation of victims that would make him immortal. But Maggie refuses to be manipulated. Determined to end the nightmare once and for all, she and the survivors decide to face him in the real world, where he's vulnerable. The final battle brings an ironic twist. Maggie uses against Freddy the very same weapons he once used to massacre his victims, knives, and even the iconic bladed glove.
Showed my mother.
After a brutal fight, Maggie pins Freddy against a beam, trapping him, and without hesitation, she stuffs dynamite into his chest. The impact is devastating, a colossal explosion that blows Freddy Krueger to pieces, scattering fire and wreckage. But deep down, you already know, Freddy never truly disappears forever. The Nightmare Recreated. In Wes Craven's New Nightmare, the saga takes an unexpected meta turn. Actress Heather Langenkamp, known for playing Nancy, starts being hunted, but this time, not just in a movie script. An ancient demonic entity that had once been contained by the very existence of the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise finds a loophole once the movies end. Freed once again, it takes on the form of a darker, more grotesque, and more threatening Freddy Krueger. As the story unfolds, Heather realizes she can only face this evil by stepping back into the role that made her famous, becoming Nancy, Freddy's eternal rival. Alongside her son Dylan, she dives into a real nightmare, where the line between fiction and reality completely disappears. Sadly, young Dylan is hospitalized, and his babysitter Julie decides to stay with him to protect him. The hospital room looks safe, lit by the cold lights of medical equipment, but the boy gets sleepy, and as soon as Dylan closes his eyes, Freddy's presence becomes inevitable. Julie tries to keep him awake, but is caught off guard by the attack.
What's wrong? Dylan, stop it. You're scaring me. Dylan.
After Dylan is forced to witness a horrific death, he's kidnapped by the creature and dragged into a grotesque dream world. He hides inside a giant furnace while Heather battles the monster. With a precise strike to Freddy's leg, she gains just enough time to rescue her son. Mother and child then join forces. They trap the entity inside the furnace, which is quickly engulfed in flames. Fire, always tied to Freddy's origin, once again becomes his downfall. The flames consume him, burning away his form until he's completely destroyed. Heather and Dylan escape, leaving behind not only the entity's body, but also the weight of a story that blurred into their real lives. Once again, fire was the ultimate weapon against evil. The clash of monsters. In Freddy vs. Jason, two horror icons finally face off in a bloody, massive showdown. The fight fans had been waiting for decades. It was also the last time Robert Englund played Freddy Krueger on the big screen, making the clash even more memorable. Weakened and powerless, Freddy is stuck in hell, forgotten by Springwood's people. With no one remembering his crimes, the new generations don't fear him anymore, making him vulnerable. To regain his strength, he manipulates Jason Vorhees, sending him back to town to spread terror and reignite the fear Freddy feeds on. The plan works at first, but quickly spirals out of control. Jason doesn't stop killing, stacking up victims that should have been Freddy's. What was supposed to be an alliance turns into a bloody competition for domination of the nightmare.
For good! Not my arm!
In the climax, both are pulled into the real world by a group of survivors, leading to an epic battle at Camp Crystal Lake, Jason's old killing ground. The fight is pure carnage. Freddy launches his blades like missiles, Jason smashes him through windows, metal structures collapse, and even gas tanks get turned into weapons. The brutal pier fight pushes the violence to the max. Jason rips Freddy's arm off, but Freddy stabs Jason in the eye with his glove and even slashes him with Jason's own machete. But just when Freddy looks about to win, the tables turn. Jason impales him with his own bladed arm, driving it straight through Freddy's body. And to finish it off, Laurie Campbell, the protagonist, grabs Jason's machete and delivers the final blow, decapitating Freddy Krueger. The Dream Killer's headless body sinks into the dark waters of the lake. For a moment, it seemed the war was over, but as always, Freddy pulls one last trick. His severed head looks straight at the camera and winks at the audience. The end in flames. In the remake of A Nightmare on Elm Street, Nancy Holbrook takes the lead in the fight against Freddy Krueger. After being hunted non-stop in her dreams, Nancy decides to use the same strategy as in the 1984 classic, pulling Freddy into the real world. The showdown happens inside a claustrophobic, dark, decaying room. At the height of the battle, Freddy viciously attacks Quentin, plunging his claws into his chest. Nancy, desperate, acts within seconds to save her friend's life.
Now why don't you just f***ing die?
It hurts, doesn't it? It's because you're in my world now.
She slashes Freddy's hand with a shard of glass, then slices his throat with a quick, deadly strike. He's left with that stunned look, like he never imagined this could happen. His body falls heavily to the ground, lifeless as if he couldn't believe he'd actually been beaten. Not satisfied, Nancy takes the chance to set the room on fire, engulfing Freddy in flames and cruelly recreating the same death he once suffered. The fire consumes his body, repeating his very first death. Once again, fire becomes the symbol of his end, a repeated punishment that seals his fate. And there you go. That was the last time Freddy Krueger died on the big screen. Well, at least until someone decides to bring him back again, right? All deaths of Ghostface. The first Ghostface. It all begins in a quiet house with the phone ringing nonstop. Casey Becker, a teenager, picks up, but the voice on the other end carries something sinister. At first, it seems like just a prank. Questions about horror movies, a teasing tone, almost seductive. The rules are simple. Get a question wrong, and you die. When Casey finally realizes she's being watched through the windows, panic takes over. The masked killer appears and takes her life right there in the yard, hanging her body from a tree as a gruesome warning. The entire town of Woodsboro is in shock, and soon terror knocks on Sidney Prescott's door. Still traumatized by her mother's murder a year earlier, she starts receiving the same terrifying calls. The distorted voice asks personal questions, opens old wounds, threatens.
If you hang up on me, you'll die just like your mother. Do you want to die, Sidney? Your mother sure didn't.
And then attacks without warning. Sidney barely survives the first attack at home, but the nightmare's only beginning. With her father mysteriously missing right when the killings start, she can only count on a few allies. Tatum, her loyal best friend, and Dewey, Tatum's brother who works as a cop knave but determined to protect them. But the list of suspects grows with every death. There's Randy Meeks, the movie geek obsessed with horror who knows every rule of the genre, Stu Macher, Tatum's seemingly carefree boyfriend, always joking around, and Billy Loomis, Sidney's boyfriend, who shows up at the most suspicious moments. As the body count rises like the school principal, Tatum in the garage, Randy almost killed, the classic horror movie rules come to life. The masked killer always seems one step ahead, knowing every move, every secret. During the party at Stu's house with the teens gathered to watch a scary movie, the brutal truth finally comes out. It's there that Sidney learns she's been betrayed by the ones closest to her. It wasn't just one killer following a pattern, it was two. Billy Loomis and Stu Mack are working together, taking turns behind the Ghostface mask. Billy driven by a twisted thirst for revenge against Sidney's mother, who destroyed his family by having an affair with his dad. Stu, just following Billy, they orchestrated every murder, every phone call, every moment of terror, turning killing into a sadistic game where Sidney was both the main victim and the planned final survivor. But Sidney Prescott isn't the typical final girl who just screams and runs. With strength and a hunger for justice, she turns the tables on the very creators of the nightmare. In the end, Ghostface wasn't some distant monster. It was the people she trusted most. The return of Ghostface. 1 year after the Woodsboro massacre, Sidney desperately tries to rebuild her life in college. But some nightmares never really die. During the premiere of Stab, a movie based on the crimes of the first Ghostface, a couple of students are brutally murdered in the middle of the crowded theater. The audience cheers, thinking the blood splattering on the seats is part of the show, until they realize the screams of agony are way too real. Ghostface is back, and this time the rules have changed. Meanwhile, Sidney tries to keep up a front of normalcy. Theater, classes, new friends, desperate attempts to forget the past. But when the phone rings with that familiar distorted voice, she knows the running is over.
My pleasure.
The calls start again, crueler and more personal than before, and the deaths multiply in a terrifying escalation. This time, even those who swore to protect her fall one by one, like pieces on a grim chessboard. Tatum isn't there anymore to give support and nervous laughs, but Sidney still has a couple of wounded allies. Dewey, scarred inside and out from the first massacre, and Gail Weathers, the ambitious reporter now forced to choose between her career and survival. Still, paranoia spreads. Nobody seems trustworthy when anyone could be behind the mask. With every attack, the walls close in and the tension grows unbearable. Sidney doesn't know who to believe anymore, can't tell friend from enemy. The deadly game goes on, always following the sequel rules. More deaths, more violence, more betrayals, and a killer even crueler than the original. The victims fall in a pattern, each death more elaborate than the last, as if the killer were trying to outdo his own twisted masterpiece. By the end, Sidney finds herself cornered with no way out, and the truth is finally exposed in all its cruelty. Ghostface wasn't just a copycat chasing fame, it was two. Again, Mickey, the obsessive film student who knows every horror movie ever made, wanted to be caught, tried, and remembered as the most famous killer in history. But the real mastermind was even more shocking. Debbie Loomis, Billy's disturbed mother, the original killer's mom. Fueled by a mother's thirst for revenge, she had meticulously planned every detail to destroy Sidney Prescott, blaming her for Billy's death. The plan was perfect. Use Mickey as a puppet, kill him later, and leave Sidney dead with all the blame for the new massacre. But once again, Sidney refuses to be just another helpless victim. With the determination of someone who has stared death in the face, she fights tooth and nail. But when Debbie Loomis goes in for the final blow, an unexpected figure shows up, Cotton Weary, the man she had manipulated and used as a pawn in her revenge game. In one final act, Cotton shoots Debbie dead, putting an end to the Loomis family's cycle of vengeance. The big reveal. By the third film, the bloody murders in Woodsboro had already become Hollywood gold. The Stab franchise turned every drop of spilled blood into pure spectacle for the audience. But in Los Angeles, the city of dreams and nightmares, fiction was about to blur with reality for good. Cotton Weary, now a TV host celebrity, thought he had left the past behind. But Ghostface doesn't forget. The massacre begins in his own home. The killer breaks into his mansion, terrorizes his girlfriend Christine Hamilton. Yeah, Ghostface is back, and this time Hollywood is the stage. The terror quickly spreads to the studios, and a new massacre starts during the filming of Stab 3. One by one, the actors playing Sidney, Gail, and Dewey in Stab 3 are killed in increasingly elaborate ways, as if the script itself were being rewritten in fresh blood. Sarah Darling, one of the actresses in Stab 3, is brutally stabbed on the studio lot after receiving a sinister phone call. Tom Prinz, the actor playing Dewey Riley in Stab 3, also becomes a target of Ghostface. Each death mirrors and surpasses the original atrocities. Meanwhile, Sidney Prescott lives isolated in a remote cabin, surrounded by security systems, desperately trying to escape a past that haunts her like a curse. But when the phone rings with that same familiar distorted voice again, she already knows she can't hide anymore. Once again, paranoia and mistrust eat away at everything around Sidney. As the bodies pile up in a sinister pattern, disturbing clues start to surface. Old photos of Sidney's mother are scattered at the crime scenes. The game now goes beyond the present, digging up secrets that should have stayed buried forever. The investigation leads Sidney to a remote mansion in the hills, where the final truth awaits. At last, she discovers the identity of the manipulator behind all her agony. The killer is Roman Bridger, the director of Stab, but he's not just another frustrated filmmaker out for revenge on Hollywood. He's Sidney's rejected half-brother, the result of an affair Maureen Prescott tried to forget forever. He discovered his mother's dark secret, sought her out in Woodsboro, was brutally rejected, and then orchestrated his revenge with mastery. Roman had manipulated Billy Loomis, turning him into the first Ghostface. Now he wanted to end his masterpiece by killing Sidney live, turning her murder into the perfect grand finale of his personal movie. But Sidney, in one last act, kills him, closing the cycle of vengeance that began before she was even born. When the smoke clears and everyone is finally safe, Sidney returns home. For the first time in years, she leaves the front door open. Not out of carelessness or recklessness, but because she's finally lost the fear that imprisoned her. But the Ghostface mask never stays buried for long. The New Generation. 10 years after the last massacre, Sidney Prescott makes the boldest decision of her life, to willingly return to the place where it all began, the town of Woodsboro. She wrote a book about survival, trying to turn every scar into a source of strength for other victims. But her return to the cursed town also marks the inevitable return of a familiar presence. Ghostface. Yep, he's back. The first victims are two students, Jenny Randall and Marnie Cooper, casually talking about predictable horror movie cliches while watching Stab 7. Think about it. If it's already at number 7, that movie must have made some serious money. The phone rings with that sinister tone that's haunted Woodsboro for decades. At first, the whole thing feels like just another self-referential parody of the movies themselves, until the chilling screams echoing through the house turn out to be real. Soon, the little town that never managed to forget its bloody past falls into a new cycle of terror, more brutal and elaborate than all the ones before. Sidney has to face the horror again, but now the targets also include a new generation. Her cousin Jill Roberts and her whole group of teenage friends become the masked killer's new obsession. Rebecca Walters, the ambitious publicist, ends up being the next victim. And Olivia Morris, the reckless rebel of the group, is slaughtered in her own house while Jill and Kirby watch in horror from the neighbor's window, powerless to save her. Ghostface returns, striking without mercy, turning every murder into viral content for the digital age. As the young bodies pile up in an increasingly savage pattern, the old rules no longer apply. It's no longer about predictable sequels, but about brutal remakes. And in a modern remake, any character can be sacrificed just to shock the audience. The terror escalates when Charlie Walker shows up at the glass doors with his hands covered in blood, claiming he found Robbie Mercer, the group's streamer, dead. But Kirby refuses to let Charlie inside, afraid for her own life. Then Ghostface attacks him outside. Soon after, he reappears, wounded and tied up outside, while Kirby desperately tries to save her friend. But the moment she gets close to help him, Charlie does something that leaves everyone stunned.
4 years of classes together, and you notice me now?
Meanwhile, Sidney is searching for Jill at all costs inside the house when she's caught off guard by Charlie and someone else. Behind the iconic mask, it's not a random psycho or some Avenger from the past. It's Jill Roberts, Sidney's own seemingly innocent cousin. She desperately wanted to become the new Sidney Prescott, the only traumatized survivor, the perfect brave girl, forever idolized by the media and social networks. To reach that goal, she didn't hesitate to manipulate and murder close friends, betray longtime allies, and even attack her own family without a shred of remorse. Charlie Walker, her movie nerd accomplice who loved her, had helped with the murders, hoping to win her heart, only to be betrayed and stabbed by her in the end.
You were the idea, man.
After pretending to be just another wounded victim and getting taken to the hospital, Jill tries to pull off her final move. But even injured and underestimated, Sidney Prescott refuses to hand over her survivor's crown to a cruel copycat. In a brutal and desperate hospital showdown, she resists her cousin's calculated violence, proving once again that experience beats young ambition.
Clear. Clear.
Jill dies trying to keep her lie alive until her last breath. Sydney remains standing as the one and only true survivor. But as we'll see in a moment, the legend of Ghostface never really rests. Seriously, this fourth movie is my favorite in the whole franchise. And if you stop to think about it, Jill speaks directly to today's world. People doing insane things just to get famous.
Jill Roberts of Woodsboro, a girl who's lifted all our spirits tonight, an American hero right out of the movies.
The Cursed Legacy. In the fifth movie, more than 2 decades have passed since the first massacre, and the cursed town once again becomes the stage for a familiar nightmare. A new generation is about to find out that some legacies never die. Tara Carpenter is home alone watching a horror movie when the phone rings. On the other end, that same distorted, sinister voice begins the deadly game of horror movie trivia. Tara tries to fight back, breaking the classic rules, challenging the killer, but Ghostface breaks into her house and attacks with savage brutality that makes it clear this isn't some nostalgic prank. Tara survives by a miracle, but the message to Woodsboro is loud and clear. The game has restarted with new rules, and no one is safe. Her older sister, Sam Carpenter, rushes back to town after years of running from her own past to take care of Tara. But Sam carries a dark secret she's tried to bury forever. She's the biological daughter of Billy Loomis, the original killer who began the cycle of terror decades earlier. Meanwhile, Tara's new group of friends automatically ends up on the twisted list of suspects and potential victims. What's clear is that Ghostface returns, killing mercilessly without any predictable pattern. The killer first targets Sheriff Judy Hicks in her own home, stabbing her multiple times in the stomach as she tries to protect her son. Then Wes Hicks, the sheriff's son, is brutally killed right after. To face this new wave of crimes that echo old traumas, the veteran survivors from the past are reluctantly pulled back into the nightmare. Dewey Riley, now bitter, divorced, and consumed by alcohol, initially refuses to help, but eventually gives in to that protective instinct that always defined him. Gale Weathers and Sidney Prescott also return, once again dragged into the endless blood cycle that's haunted them for decades. But not even the veterans make it out unscathed at this time. In one of the most devastating and shocking sequences in the entire franchise, Dewey is ambushed in the hospital by Ghostface. The man who survived 4 previous massacres, who dedicated his life to protecting others, is killed brutally. Then, in their desperate attempt to process the trauma, the young survivors gather at Amber Freeman's house, Tara's best friend, who happens to live in Stu Maker's old house, where the 1996 massacre took place. And there, in the middle of chaos and despair, the truth behind the new murders finally comes out.
Killer! I know. Welcome to Act 3.
Thank God you're okay. Because I really...
The masked killers are Richie Kirsch, Sam's seemingly loving and protective boyfriend, and Amber Freeman, 2 fanatics obsessed with the Stab franchise. Driven by a toxic obsession with the purity of the original story, they wanted to create an authentic new version of the legend, with real deaths and genuine trauma to inspire the perfect cinematic reboot. But their carefully planned scheme doesn't go the way they expected. Sam, once tormented and ashamed of Billy Loomis's cursed legacy, finally embraces the killer's fury running through her veins to protect the people she loves. And in a sequence that mirrors the violence of her biological father, Sam kills Richie by stabbing him repeatedly, then shooting him to make sure he's dead. Amber, meanwhile, is burned alive by Gale Weathers, who shoots her and sets her on fire. But in one last desperate attempt, Amber bursts out of the kitchen, attacking the group with a knife, only to be fatally shot by Tara. In the end, Tara survives physically unharmed, and Sam finally accepts a liberating truth. She can't run from her DNA, but she can choose how to use it. With that, Ghostface is defeated once again, for now. Ghostface family. The stage of the 6th movie is New York City, a brand new metropolis, a new chance to start fresh, far from Woodsboro's cursed shadows. After the bloody horrors that almost destroyed their souls, Sam and Tara Carpenter desperately try to rebuild their lives. But some nightmares are impossible to leave behind. Ghostface's mask has followed them like an obsessive parasite. The real game is just beginning, and now the terror is playing on another level. Sam, Tara, and their new allies form a group united by trauma and marked by constant fear. Meanwhile, Dr. Christopher Stone, Sam's therapist, is brutally murdered in his own home. With that, Ghostface gets his info and goes after the sisters. In their apartment, he starts killing anyone in his way until he finally finds his targets. But during one of the attacks, Annika Kayoko, Mindy's loving girlfriend, is stabbed in the stomach by Ghostface. Bleeding badly, she tries to escape across a makeshift ladder between apartments, but ends up being thrown off by the killer. Sam finds herself cornered not only by physical attacks, but also by online conspiracy theories claiming she's the true heir of evil, just because she carries Billy Loomis's cursed DNA. The whole city seems to be against her, and every face in the crowd could be hiding an enemy. Meanwhile, Gail Weathers is attacked in her apartment by Ghostface. But manages to survive, though left seriously wounded. It's inside an old abandoned theater, turned into a shrine dedicated to Ghostface's history, that the truth behind this new bloodbath comes out. This time it wasn't a lone killer seeking fame, and it wasn't even two obsessed accomplices, it was three, a whole family dedicated to revenge. Detective Wayne Bailey, grieving father of Richie Kirsch, one of the killers from the previous movie, had planned every murder meticulously to avenge his dead son. By his side were his surviving kids, Ethan Bailey and Quinn Bailey, united by grief twisted into hatred. An entire dynasty of killers devoted to continuing and expanding Ghostface's bloody legacy, using police resources and privileged access to orchestrate the perfect massacre. But even surrounded and seemingly beaten, the Carpenter sisters refuse to accept the role of helpless victims. Sam and Tara, fighting for survival, turn into fierce predators. Tara kills Ethan in a bloody fight. Sam kills Quinn in a brutal battle that stains the theater's relics with fresh blood. And Sam, finally embracing the dark legacy she tried to deny, puts on the iconic Ghostface mask to psychologically manipulate Wayne. In the end, the Carpenter sisters stand as the only survivors of yet another massacre. The cycle of revenge ends, but the Ghostface mask remains intact, patiently waiting for whoever will wear it next.